Okay, excellent. So, hey everyone, I'm Kaushik. Like I mentioned, I've started my career in investment banking at Goldman Sachs in 2012. Um, you know, Part of the discussion today is going to be around how to be successful in recruiting and how to be enter some of these varied careers, whether it's in private equity, growth equity, venture capital, consulting, investment banking, etc. And part of this discussion also will be around how to think about larger career success and sort of how do you set goals for yourself for the first 3 to 5 years of your career, and how do you achieve them, right? And sort of surpass them. And so I'll give everyone on the call here lessons learned as well as I've gone through my career, so that you also maybe don't make the same mistakes, I suppose. But one of the first questions I get asked, right? Hey, you started Goldman. How did you pick the industry group that you wanted to get into? And the answer I always give for students and early professionals on this one is I'd probably say two vectors informed me, and which was a good decision framework. Number one was, what was an industry that I was genuinely interested, excited about, right? So if someone sort of told me, hey, you got to be up at 6 a.m. tomorrow, we have to go get ready for a client in X, Y, and Z industry, and go read up their 10K, or go read up a bunch of stuff about that client, or go figure out what the company does, there would be a level of excitement and interest in that industry. I couldn't say the same for a lot of the other industries, perhaps. I don't know that I get that excited about, natural resources or energy or other things like that, right? So for me, financial services was super exciting because post-financial crisis, I felt like there was this immense necessitation of disruption and innovation, right, that could happen in financial services. And so that was one of the reasons I was genuinely interested and passionate about it. Number two, go into industries. We're going into a world, whether it's in private equity, growth equity, venture capital, or investment banking, which is becoming exceedingly more specialized. So yes, it's fine to be a generalist for the first 2, 3 years of your career, but the investors that end up being the most successful, or the sort of bankers or consultants that end up becoming the most successful early on in their career, are able to identify certain industries that they can become the best at, right? So we notice this a lot with our early professionals within Elevate. So the second metric I would give everyone here is finding an industry that you think has a lot of sort of, room to go, has a lot of growth potential, and is an industry that you want to be a part of for the next sort of 5 to 10 years. Maybe those are the two metrics here. So anyway, so I started my career at Goldman in our financial services group. I did have the opportunity as an associate there to lead 3 of the largest deals that we did in the in financial services post the crisis. So I led the $3 billion IPO of Synchrony. Which was the largest IPO since Facebook. I led its split off, which is about a $22 billion deal, I think. And then we led the $100 billion divestiture of G Capital. So the second thing a lot of people ask me is, okay, how do you get on these really, really awesome transactions and projects early on in your career, right? Maybe my advice on that point would be your number one goal. I think, again, everyone's goal is going to be different. Your broader career goal, which I'll get to later, should be to do 3 things. Number one is to become the best at something. Okay, so that's who the world looks to as you go through your career, to people that you want to work with, right? So when I work with bankers, or when I work with consultants, or when I work with whoever, we want to work with the top 10% of anything. And the way you become, the best at something is actually, putting in the time, the effort, and energy to sort of, to become great at it. So so back to the 3 metrics of career success. Number one, become the best at something, or aspire to become the best at something. Number two, find things you're genuinely passionate about and interested in, right? So pursue your passions and interests in a way. And then number 3, define your own version of what it means to be successful or make an impact, and go at it, right? So those to me are like the 3 ways I would think about aligning your career. So if you then think about how do you achieve quote success early on in your career, it's sort of taking on roles and responsibilities and jobs that allow you to work towards those 3 goals in some capacity. And so now back to the second point about how do you get on all these great transactions is just number one, doing a good job in sort of the role that you're given when you start off with. And then number 2, sort of trying to go above and beyond where you can in building relationships or getting on teams or projects that will allow you sort of that opportunity set to get on really cool projects. And then number 3, sort of just a little bit of luck, right? So putting yourself in places to be lucky, right? Go join a firm, or go join an industry group that has a track record of doing a lot of deals. And guess what? You will be on a lot of great deals that you'll work on. So I think, we can get into more specific advice that people have or questions that you have, but just something else to think about. The third point I'd highlight was, throughout my career, I've just felt like it's very important to not just give back, but also to help build the next generation of talent across all these industries that we work with. And part of the reason why I started Elevate, but also before then, I served in multiple leadership roles at Goldman. And that's one thing I'd advise everyone here to do is wherever you end up going to start your career or later on in your career, try to become like a leader in the sense that try to take on responsibilities or teams that allow you to build people up, right? Similar to yourself. When you build other people, you build yourself up. And so for those reasons, like I actually was assigned or sort of asked to be a leader in some ways at Goldman, but I took on the role of chief of staff within investment banking. So that was a tremendous role that helped shape a lot of the policies that we have at Goldman, but also across Wall Street now. Like we were on the initial committee that did the Saturday policy or the weekend policy or the junior banker policies, all of those things that I worked on, in 2014, 2015. And I think in a lot of ways, right, and all the diversity initiatives, I think, one of the things our industry continues to have to work on and needs to work on actually is that is the introduction of and support of more and more people that don't come from these finance backgrounds or don't have family in finance or kind of come from all. I think we need people who have lots of different points of views and lots of different perspectives. And so as a result, we did initiated a lot of those types of initiatives at Goldman as well. And so my point is take on leadership roles and change wherever you are. Okay. And I also led the analyst and associate committee and also part of the summer analyst and promotion committee. So a lot of the things I'll tell you all in this call today is going to be informed by those roles as well. So I'll give you a little bit of perspective on Elevate before we jump into this. Oh shoot, is my screen broken? 1 second, team. Okay, so what is Elevate? I started this in about 2+ years ago, and now it's the largest network for private equity, investment banking, hedge fund, venture capital, growth equity, and recently fintech and entrepreneurship as well. So sort of all of the arenas around financial services and investing and financial technology. There's 4 main platforms in it, which, Samaya, Neha, and Carly now will, I'm sure, give everyone here more information about. There's a networking platform. So we have the largest networking platform that's peer-to-peer. So if you all go to Duke and you're interested in, healthcare, private equity, guess what? Maybe the Duke community is small for that, but you can go meet people at, Princeton or UPenn or Columbia or et cetera on this networking platform. It's called Connect. We have a wait list now, but we will send everyone information to the extent that you're interested in it. You can obviously take meetings on that call, on that platform. There's a learning platform, which I'll share with you in 1 second. There's a lot of excitement about that one, just because that it's got learning directly from all these professionals from top firms. We have a recruitment platform, which I'm sure if you haven't seen already, I'm sure you have, but tons of events with firms on various recruiting initiatives, and then also investing platform, which we'll get to later. As part of that, we're partnered with, we'll get to this, the top 30 universities, about 100 clubs like BOW and other clubs across the nation. Also on the right side of the page, very partner with all the top 12 business schools as well. And then just to give you guys some insight on our firm partners, top 10 private equity firms, top bulge bracket investment banks. In fact, we're having on JP Morgan in 2 weeks. So if anyone's interested in banking for class of 2024 recruiting for class, summer of 2023, should check that event out. We have on LionTree, which is a fantastic investment banking boutique firm. They've led some of the largest deals ever in sort of the TMT space. So that's going to be in 2 weeks as well. We have on a growth equity recruiting event, this Saturday with TCD, which is a top 5 growth equity firm, and BlackRock, Wharton. It just keeps, just kind of keep abreast of sort of a lot of these roles and opportunities. I'm sure, you can get involved. What else? And these are just some examples of events that we've had recently, kind of all the top firms and professionals we've been able to feature. So let me sort of pause there. I think I want to jump into some of these topics, but 1 sec, some messages here. If you have questions, definitely raise your hand and I will just share a couple links while we're at it, so you all can have access. And then I think the events page is where you'll find all of the upcoming events. And yeah, so the way to navigate that would just be, I can quickly share with you. Okay, so for instance, if you go on this page, team, you just go to obviously events, and then you just click on firms and pros. You can just sort of see what are the recent events, like for instance, this diversity one, Samaya was on it, but we spoke about investment banking diversity, and with the recording of that should be out. Other firms that we've had on, certainly go, and the JP Morgan and the LionTree, all that stuff will be on here as well for you all to access. And then while I'm at this is another great resource for partner schools. If you're interested in a certain industry, right? Private equity, for instance, there's about 500 videos where you can go kind of figure out, like, hey, I'm interested in Warburg Pincus. What is the interview process like, and what are people looking for? So just examples, you can go and check it out. It's all free for our partner club. So our students love it, and I'm sure you guys will too. So these are just more resources that we wanted to basically democratize access to a lot of these careers for everyone in the world. So that's the motivation. Okay, so let's get to some of the other stuff that we want to talk about today. Again, feel free to stop me and ask questions. Recruiting, obviously recruiting is going on right now. I'm not going to hit really the differences and similarities between banking, private equity, growth equity. I think at a high level, investment banking, which a lot of our students go into, is basically a great place to start your career. It's not somewhere that everyone ends up doing 10 years in, but it's sort of a place where a lot of people start their careers off in for 2 to 3 years. At that junior level, you're learning a lot of analytical skill set, transaction skill set, etc. If you want more information, you can see all the sessions on the right on all the firms and pros that we've had on Elevate. You build a deep financial skill set, which I think is important early on in your career, right? When you think about what are the skills you want to be building early on, it's tangible skills about either about business, either about companies, industries, financial transactions, etc. So it gives you a platform to really do that. And then as you progress, it becomes more client relationships, deal execution, etc. The second big area that our students go into is private equity. Very different. Investment banking is an advisory role. Private equity is an investing role. So in this case, you are an investor. You are the owner, right? So your job is to find companies that are interesting to invest in. So as a result, your job, if you work at Carlyle or any of these firms, will be spent on, in any given year, you're probably digging into 3 to 5 companies and then really going deep and understanding if that company is worth investing in. So your work is going to be a lot of financial analysis, a lot of industry analysis, a lot of sort of diligence around the company. Is this something you want to own, et cetera. There's always also an operational element to private equity, especially as our people become more senior. So my associates and my vice presidents within Elevate are sitting on boards, right? So they're effectively affecting change at all these portfolio companies. Where at the analyst level, you are much more kind of doing all the analysis. The other piece of private investing is growth equity or venture capital. Obviously, growth equity is one of the hottest areas as far as buy-side careers go in the last couple of years. And the difference here is you're investing in companies slightly earlier stage, right? So think about Uber before it was Uber, or Peloton before it was Peloton, or Spotify before it was Spotify. You're finding ideas in companies that show a ton of growth, a ton of market potential, yet have some track record of success. And your job is to find out if you are going to invest in them for greater success. The cool thing about growth equity is you are not investing in a company like after it's already made it. You're helping a company along to kind of go from being only in the US to being global, or being at $100 million of revenue to $1 billion of revenue. So you're kind of growing that company meaningfully during your ownership period, which I think is pretty interesting as well. Then there's public investing. We won't touch on it as much today. This is the hedge fund world. This is investing in public companies one way or the other. So again, we won't touch this as much. If you're interested, we have had on Citadel multiple times and speakers from there, so you can go check that out as long as the other firms, along with these other firms. And then corporate consulting strategy. Consulting is more strategy focused, right? You're helping companies solve their problems from a strategic perspective. And corporate strategy and corporate M&A, you're doing M&A and strategy on behalf of a company. So I think I won't hit on this as much, since I think the majority of the audience here is second and third year. So you're probably pretty familiar with the timeline of how things work in recruiting. If not, you can always ask. But few different things I like to cover with students. 5 pieces to recruiting. Obviously, a lot of the applications have opened. In fact, some banks are already having super days and stuff. So I think just really important, wherever you are in the process, one, not to freak out, but number two, the next 2 months is going, if you are interested in banking or private equity, or especially banking, very important for you to mobilize around a strategy that would work for you all to sort of make an impact around a couple of dimensions. Number one, 5 pieces. Number one is university. You all go to a great university. The key for you is to figure out which banks and which firms have Duke specific recruiting teams, and then sort of which may or may not, and what is their approach to recruiting at campus. The ones that do have recruiting teams that are specific to Duke, I would take a very proactive approach to reaching out to people there and start developing relationships, right, with people on the recruiting team, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who are doing the first screening of people on deciding who gets the interview or not. So to take you all behind the scenes a little bit, right, when I was, doing recruiting at GS, we get 200 resumes from every given school, right, or 300 resumes, and we were tasked with how do we invite 30 of these people to an interview, right? So on surface, it's very hard, right? Because everyone has a very similar resume. And the way you make an impact, right? Number one is how proactively have you started building relationships? So that's sort of the first point. Number two, academic performance, not from a sense of like, we all need a minimum GPA or something, but making sure that we sort of see rigor of major, the actual quantum of your GPA, and some of the courses that you're taking that, that demonstrate a level of aptitude analytically as well as sort of technically, right? So that's all we were trying to see here. It's completely okay if you're not doing a business major or an economics major or a finance major, but your job is to convince a recruiter or an interviewer why the major that you are doing is going to help you become good at this job or help you be good at this job. So we'll get to the interviews in a second. Third is internship experience, resume building. So I would presume a lot of you all have internships for your second year already, but the goal is to progress. Okay, so wherever, or if you're a first year, we can talk about this, but wherever you interned your first year, then translate that to getting an internship in hopefully a more similar career than what you want to get into for full-time or for the next summer, and then taking that and then building a story around that as to why that will help you become a good analyst in banking or private equity, right? So that's what we want to see. Hey, I worked at a startup my freshman year. Then I worked at a regional private equity firm. I understood, or I'm going to understand or develop an understanding of how transactions work and how the whole process works. I want to take that and combine those experiences and now be on the advisory side. And thus I'm recruiting for investment banking. So like, I'm just giving you an example, but that's sort of what the progression that we want to see when we get to interviews is that, hey, this candidate has been thoughtful about getting A to B. And look, the honest reality is sometimes we aren't thoughtful. Like we just take the internship that we get, but it's sort of on you a little bit to give us a little bit of the bridge of why you went from A to B. And it always, it's always the candidates that give us an insight into the thought process that end up, succeeding in interviews. I get asked this question a lot. Hey, like, how do you know at the end of 30 minutes or 20 minutes that this candidate is, objectively, subjectively, whatever, better than someone else? And it's usually in how the answers are presented, how much conviction and thought there's behind it, and how much structure there's behind answers. Again, we'll get to this interview thing in a second, but that always differentiates, right? Because at the end of the day, many of you are exceptional performers at an exceptional university. So how do you sort of present your own story in that way? Okay, so the fourth thing I want everyone here to think about is networking. Look, some of you are going to be ahead of the median line in networking in terms of how much networking you've done. Some of you might be on the other side, but your goal of the next 2 months should be to do whatever it takes to build good relationships with a few handful, as many banks as you can, that will help you sort of get one of you into the bank, but also two, everyone to know about who you are on the recruiting team or at the bank, and then say, hey, I know Carly, she reached out to me. We had a great conversation as an informational, and I think she'd be great, right, to sort of include in our process. Versus, hey, I don't know who Kaushik is. I've never met him. He never reached out. He's not even reached out to a single Duke alum at Goldman. Then guess what? He probably is not proactive. So I'm giving you two extremes of the same thing. But I think the point is, it's hard though, right? As you've been through it, we'll get to networking in a second. But the challenge with networking is there's three main challenges. Number one, it takes a lot of time, right? So you have to figure out what is your strategy that you want to deploy and be able to be relentless at it, right? So you have to create your networking list, email people, follow up with them, et cetera. So it's a little bit of attrition, right? So my advice on that point would be, it's only 2 months, so just give it your all and do as best job as you can and as comprehensive as you can be. The second problem with networking is capturing people's attention, right? So if we're getting, if a firm came, if we went to a university, I remember, doing this at GS, like we go to university, and then the day after or that night, I get 100 emails from Chicago or from Stanford, any of these universities that we went to, and you're like, okay, well, there's no way I can respond to 100 emails or even 50 emails or 30 emails in a day. So how is this individual's like message stand out to me? Or maybe it's someone that made a connection on something that there's commonalities or something like that. So the first piece is the logistics. The second piece is the communication and capturing people's attention. And obviously then the third piece that's challenging is the making an impression when you speak to them, right? So on the second piece about making an impression, I would bring in any piece of commonality that you can and read your email from the other person's perspective. We all sound great to ourselves. Hey, I'm Kaushik, I'm so amazing. Like I am a student leader here and I'm doing this, that, and the other, which I'm sure is great, but read it from the other person's perspective saying, hey, like, are these the things that I want people to, learn about me? Hey, you know what? I am, I'm a board member, or I'm one of the sort of, X, Y, and Z chairs at Business Oriented Women. I'm really passionate about this. I intern X, Y, and Z. So now you start giving them data points to be like, okay, cool. This is someone that is showing leadership capability and aptitude in different aspects of their life versus, hey, I noticed you went to Duke. I also go to Duke. I'm studying math. I'm really excited about Goldman and I want to whatever. Or I mean, that's a very, very like lame version, but something like that doesn't give them enough of a reason to respond to you, right? So I think, you can use things like, hey, I noticed you were in Business Oriented Women. So I noticed you were on the X, Y, and Z committee. I'm also on this committee. I think it's really awesome. So I'd love to sort of hear about your experience at Lazard, right? Something like that where you can make connectivities and show a little bit about yourself beyond that. Again, there's lots of tricks to networking, which if as time permits, I will get into that as we go. And the final piece here, which I said was the third part that was challenging, is the interviewing, right? So now you've done all the hard work, you've put in all the work, you've gotten someone to respond to you and get on the phone or get on Zoom. Now, how do you make a positive impression on that person, right? So I'll get to that as well in a second, but there's two types of interviews. One, there's an informational interview and there's a formal interview. The informational interview, often it's just called informational, is where, Elizabeth, Carly, Joe, I'm just going off the names that I see here, like reach out and say, hey, I'm interested. And say, okay, cool, let's get on the phone. And then you're like, hey, I'm Carly and blah, blah, blah. And you spend 20 minutes on Zoom saying, kind of telling us who you are and we telling us about the firm. So that's the informational. The more formal interview, obviously, is like the actual 30-minute Zoom or the higher view, where it's much more structured. Either way, the point is being prepared, having good stories, having good follow-ups, and sort of having making an impact, right? In anything that you say that leaves them with that, hey, this person's impressive, super important. I wouldn't treat even the informationals as just like a random thing. They're all interviews as far as I'm concerned. Okay, what are firms looking for? I'm not going to get into this as much. Analytical ability, technical ability, teamwork, leadership, character, interest in markets, in finance and markets, curiosity, and communication. Again, this is sort of a list that we pulled like 60 or 70 bankers who are going through recruiting, and they're like, hey, we are basically trying to find individuals who can check all these different boxes in a variety of ways. So either on the resume, either in the informational, either in networking, either in the interview, or with their work experience, or whatever the collection of experiences is. These are the boxes that we're trying to check. So what that means for you all is you can expect to be asked about teamwork in your interviews. You can expect to be asked about leadership, about character. So pulling out examples from your past or from your future or present becomes very, very important. Again, we can come back to this in a little bit. Resume building, I'm not going to get into this as much. Look, when I look at resumes, we have upwards of 60 seconds to look at a resume. Okay, so like 60, because think about it, right? We have 300 resumes in a resume book. And even if we allocated an hour, that's 5 hours for resume review, which is fine. But we have multiple people doing resume reviews. So like I'll do it, and then X, Y, and Z will do it, and then ABC will do it. But then we will kind of 3 people will look at the same resume book, and we will score each of the candidates, or we'll pull out the ones we like, and then we'll figure out who we mutually scored. Right? That's roughly how it works. And obviously, there's more technical ways we're doing it as well. But the point is, even if I had 2 minutes or a minute and a half to look at your resume, it's not that much time, right? So I want you all to think about it. I'm sure you're already working on Great Resume. I'm sure Bao has given you a ton of great feedback and sort of resources around it. But professional, I probably will have the most opportunity to look at university, what you're doing there, work experience. But generally, I'll look at like the left third of any resume, right? So, led a team or worked on this financial model or blah, blah, blah. And if it's more interesting, I'll probably, I'll read the whole thing, but just make sure you are very punchy and sort of to the point in all of your bullets in resume. And also you're focusing on action rather than just descriptions of things. Rather than saying, hey, this is a company that has 10 million of revenue or whatever, your bullet should be like, helped CEO devise strategy for $3 million revenue company. So it's a little bit more of an action oriented bullet as opposed to much more descriptory type bullet stuff. Again, if folks have specific questions on the resume, I'm happy to look at it. I mean, or give you advice. I've probably looked at tens of thousands of resumes at this point, but just general advice is section bullet has a purpose. You will be asked about any bullet on your resume in your interview. So make sure you can talk about any of them. Focus on relevance and depth as opposed to like putting on 10 internships, put on 3 and then talk about what you did at each of them. And then focus on results, right? Rather than action. Networking, again, I touched on this a little bit. I think, outreach, like I said, be expansive. So start with Duke alums, but also get to know who's on the recruiting team. Some analysts are going to be more involved than others in recruiting. So as you go through the process, you will know who is more involved and not. So develop good relationships with those people. And then if you have good relationships with one analyst, they will connect you to other people. So we have students that are like on texting basis with a lot of analysts because they've been able to sort of establish a very good communication, and that the analyst has been like responsive to that. Anyway, so let's keep going here. Also pursue multiple avenues, right? So business-oriented women is a great group, but also go to larger Duke alums, go to Duke MBA alums. A lot of our undergrad universities, like U Chicago or Northwestern or some of the schools that have amazing business schools as well, you can cross-reference your MBA peers. We work very closely with the Duke MBA school, and guess what? The number one firm that those students are going into is Morgan Stanley. The number 2 is Goldman. Number 3 is J.P. Morgan. So you can find enough alumni at Duke Fuqua in the last 3 years if you're not getting a lot of success at the undergrad level, right? So just be creative as we think about who to network. School networking recruiting teams do have an outsized view in sort of who makes sort of these processes. I talked about this communication, connectivity, really important, and capturing attention. And then the actual meeting, you'd be surprised how many people get to a meeting and are not prepared or sort of just kind of wing it. And I don't think that's that's not a preferred approach. So I would be engaged in a conversation. So if, Carly, you and I are talking and I tell you about a deal, don't just go to your next question. Ask me a follow-up about the deal that I just worked on. Hey, what was the impact of COVID? Or how did you think about leverage in this market? How do you think about, asset prices being so high? What do you think about valuations being so high? How did that factor into this? So just showing me that you're engaged with me and talking about the same thing I'm talking about, rather than only being focused on your list, I think is another great way to kind of show engagement and participation in the meeting. Have good questions. Often, right, the questions are what they leave you with, right? So that's the last thing you talk about on a call. So make sure you have interesting questions that say, hey, I noticed you started your career off in capital markets and then now went to banking or PE or whatever. How, what was the rationale for that? What has been your experience like? So just a little bit more of combination of personal, professional always feels like they're sort of the right questions to ask. But anyway, focus your questions on that. We can get to it. The next area I wanted to get into. So you know what? I've spoken for 30 minutes now. So let me just pause. And I want to just make sure that we encourage folks to ask questions. So let me pause the presentation here and then see if folks have questions that they want me to address.
I just have a question about when you're referencing like over the next 2 months for networking, were you more referring to like first year students or sophomores?
Second year students.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Good question. I think if you're a first year, I know there's not a ton of first years on this call, but my advice is really develop a strong foundation. Number one, do a really good job at school, right? Because I think GPA cutoffs and all those things are just things that are natural in as you look at the job market. Number two is really introspect a lot, because recruiting happens so early with all of these careers, whether it's banking, private equity, consulting, etc. I think, when I joined GS in 2012, we were recruiting people, end of their junior year. Now we've almost gone one whole year, which for college is a lot. That's 25% of your experience in college. And it's sort of a very formative experience, right? That you may not necessarily get to have. So my biggest recommendation for everyone is, before you get on this train moves fast when it starts moving, right? So I think before you sort of get on this train, be very, very introspective and thoughtful about why are you pursuing these things that you are, and a lot about yourself. Hey, and sometimes you don't know until you do it, which is totally fine. But the more you know, the better, right? And the earlier you know, the better. So I would say just really invest a lot in learning. And obviously you can use all of our resources. There's 500 videos from all these professionals. So go on and be like, why'd you go into growth equity? Why'd you go into venture capital? How did you get into growth equity? A lot of people say, hey, I really want to get into joining a growth equity fund, but they don't hire anyone who doesn't come from banking. So you're like, okay, well, that's one reason maybe I need to go into banking or consulting. So figure out for yourself, start mapping a little bit what your, immediate plan is going to be next summer, but also what your 3 to 5 year plan may want to be. Again, it's all going to change. We're all really young, and so on. So that's me first advice. And second is just expand your network. It doesn't have to be from a recruiting perspective, right? Don't have to go in and say, hey, I'd like to go meet someone at Morgan Stanley to get a job, but just start meeting with seniors, get some of their advice. Guess what? They're going to be on the recruiting team next year. Again, I'm not saying this from a selfish, like a transactional perspective. I just mean from a perspective of, just your own network. I will say this, and I will say this. I think I share this with all of our, 100 partner clubs that are on Elevate. Like, your network is the biggest source of capital in your career. I cannot emphasize that enough. And I see that a lot because I do work with all of the MBA schools. I work with all of the professionals, right? When you eventually graduate, you will come to the Elevate private equity seminars, not the investment banking seminars, right? Because you all will be in a position to kind of, what do you do with your careers? So much harder to build your network organically once you leave the confines of Duke, or once you leave the confines of a university, right? Because you don't really even have the student card. Like, you can say, hey, I'm just a student, I'm just looking to like meet new people. And so I would say investing in your networks early, important. And then the third is just get a solid internship for your freshman summer, or whatever, sophomore summer, wherever you are. That will help you really ground yourself for the future sort of recruiting processes. So that's just some general advice for some of our younger audience members. Okay, any other questions from other folks? Okay, so let's keep going. By the way, how many people have already gone through interviews for investment banking or are going through it in the process? Okay, so I see a couple hands too. Anything specific you want me to highlight on this? I'll go through it, but anything that you were like, oh, this is kind of, how do I answer this type of question, or how do I present my stories in this way, or any specifics to that before we jump to the interview section? Yeah,
I received a question.
Rebecca, yes.
I received a question that was kind of asking me, like, do you feel like coming from Duke, do you feel like you're going into finance because everybody else is going into finance? And I didn't really know how to answer that question because I feel like it was kind of like targeted.
Right, which is actually, it's like not a great way to ask, I think, what they're trying to get to. But can you tell the audience and me, like, how would you respond to that? And I'll give you my advice.
How I responded to it?
Yeah, I'm curious.
The company is for like a healthcare private equity firm. And so I responded and I was like, I'm not interviewing for the job just because it's finance. I'm interested in the field, like healthcare investing. So I replied that I wasn't just interviewing for blanket companies. It was the only one I was interviewing for.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, like, I've actually just primarily focused on careers in this specific industry, not just in finance, but I'm interested in exploring the finance side. But I wasn't sure if that made me look like I don't actually want to do finance. I'm not interested in finance. Like, I'm a waste of your time, waste of your investment, whatever. Just because I was like, I don't know if I want to do finance. yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't know what to say.
I understand. No. I got you. Okay. So thank you for sharing that. I think, super awesome that you did share that experience. Look, interviews can sort of be all over the place. I'll get to this in our next section, but the specific question is a good question. First of all, a couple things on this question. I think you actually had a good approach to this question, saying, hey, I'm actually interested, one, genuinely, and number two, I'm actually interested in the industry as well. But if you get a question like that, the best thing you can do is focus it on yourself and your motivations, right? So take out the noise that they put in the question about everybody else at Duke doing X, Y, and Z, right? So you just be like, I think the best way to answer that question is, look, obviously, finance is very popular at Duke, but I've taken the time. There's three things you can say. Number one, I've taken the time to really diligence why I want to get into, finance or get into this industry by doing X, Y, and Z, right? So I've spoken to a lot of alumni who've gone into finance. Again, figure out, Rebecca, you can tell me, hey, this I have done this or not, but figure out what works for you in this sense. Number two, I am part of business groups like Business Oriented Women, where I'm getting a lot of exposure to these type of different industries. And number three, I've done my own research about why I want to get into this, et cetera, right? So that number one, I've done my work around my reasons for getting into finance, and this is how I've done my work. Number two, now let me tell you why, based on all that work, I'm actually interested in finance. Number one, I'm interested in investment banking because I like the advisory aspect of it, where you are hired to give advice and help companies on their strategic and operational issues. So I want to be working on projects like that. Number two, I want to build my own technical and financial skill set, because that's something that I want to really build. And so that's a skill area that I'm going to continue to work on during my time at Duke. And hey, guess what? The flip side of your question also means that there's a lot of resources and people on campus who will help me kind of build that skill set. So, that's something I'm really focused on. And then number three, I genuinely like the industry that I'm interested in. So number one is like, I've done the work. Number two is, this is why I want to get into it. And then the third thing you can always say is, look, specifically your company, I am interested in for X, Y, and Z reasons, right? So you'll get this a lot at a lot of the large investment banks. They'll say, hey, who have you spoken to at JP Morgan? Who have you spoken to at X, Y, and Z? And say, hey, look, I've done my work around speaking to people, both people that interned there this summer, but also people that are coming in full-time or going there. These are the reasons why they told me JP Morgan was amazing. In addition to that, I like the environment that allows analysts to take on a lot of responsibilities, get on large deals, et cetera. And so that's why I want to work at your firm. So you have to take the noise out about what other people are doing and just focus on, this is why I'm doing this. This is the work I've done around it. This is why I want to do banking. And this is why I want to specifically do your firm. And if they keep pushing you on it, you just got to be like, look, I'm a strong candidate for this job, and it's driven by my own interest. And so, frankly, I'm super proud that Duke has other amazing people that are also interested in finance, but it's helped me build a community around that. And sort of that's what's going to help you be successful. So just sort of focus it around yourself a lot. I think it was partly the question I hope was asked to make candidates a little uncomfortable, as opposed to putting them on the spot and having to sort of target them in a way or something. I don't particularly think it's a good question, but you might get questions that you don't think are good questions, because people are just people, and people sometimes are, kind of crazy. So I think you just have to sort of do your best in answering them, and be confident. I think the point that you made, absolutely, I don't want you to think like that, right? I don't want you to think, hey, I'm sort of just wasting your time. No, you are as good a candidate as anyone. They've invited you to the interview. You haven't barged in their door and wasted their time. So please don't take a defensive position, and just be like, hey, I'm really good. I'm confident in that. And if you see it, great. If not, somebody else will see it. So you know what I mean? I think it's just don't get in that mindset of being put on a defensive, am I good enough? No, you're all good enough of doing this. It's just about fit. And hey, maybe you don't want to, I don't know this firm. I don't even know what it is, but I'm just saying, maybe you don't want to, at the end of the day, you get two offers and you say, you know what, that question kind of annoyed me that they would ask me that. So I'm not going to go to this firm, I'm going to the other firm, right? So there's a lot of things that could happen. So I would never get on the defensive and feel and you'll have bad interviews, team. I remember my first interview, I can't remember what bank it was. It was informational. I sent them the resume, and then I got on the phone with the principal, and they were like, hey, Kaushik, walk me through your resume. And I was like, well, what do you mean? I've already sent you my resume. What do you want me to walk through? I didn't even know how to do that. And so that definitely, I never got a call back, but it didn't let me stop me from sort of trying to do other things as well. So I just say, you will have word interviews or weird interviews. It's sort of part of the game. And I think you approached it correctly. And I would never feel like it was your wasting other people's time or anything like that. So does that make sense, Rebecca, for that question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, amazing. You're welcome. Okay, so take other questions in a second, but let me just get through the interview piece here. When we think about banking and private equity interviews, there's sort of three main components, and I'll go through all of these. We compiled here what we thought across the board with about 80 or 90 current bankers, the most common questions that they've been getting in interviews, right? And obviously there's different variations of this. Within behavioral and fit, there's two types of questions. One is pure behavioral, which is, pure fit-ish questions. And one is sort of behavioral situational. I'll get to what those are in a second. The traditional behavioral questions are things like, hey, Rebecca, I'm gonna put you on the spot since you don't have to answer me, but I'm just gonna put you as an example here because you just asked a question. Hey, Rebecca, tell me about yourself. So why are you here? And in that question, what that actually means is you got to answer four things, right? So number one, what is your background? So who are you? Number two, why, what are you interviewing for? What are your career interests? Number three, why are you here specifically? So why are you interviewing at Goldman? And number four, why we should hire you. So those are kind of the four things we're trying to get at in that question. So an example could be, hey, I'm Kaushik. I'm a second year here at Duke. I am part of, I've always been really interested in the business field, but over the last year and a half, as I've taken on sort of more responsibilities within business-oriented women, I've just discovered more of an interest and passion in investment banking. And the reason for that is, I like the idea of solving companies and their challenges and using sort of financial and analytical and learning financial analytics to do that, and analytical skills to do that. Last summer, I worked at a finance startup, and this summer I'll be working at a small venture capital firm here in DC. And I've gotten to know a few people from Goldman through the process, and I've had a really good experience. So I'm excited to be here and sort of interview spots. Something that highlights on, all the things I talked about in a 60-second period is sort of a good way to kick these things off. Practice that in front of a mirror. Practice that with friends. Because it sets the tone for the rest of the interview. Okay, so it's just important to really nail that sort of pitch that you have at the beginning. Then I'll say, okay, Kaushik, you're so amazing. Tell me about some of your strengths, right? So, whatever. So you'll say, oh, I'm really good at X, Y, and Z. Pick things here that one, you can have sort of follow-ups to. So if you say, hey, I'm really attention detailed, they'll be like, okay, tell me about a situation where you were attention detail, where you had a lot of attention detail. And be like, oh yeah, that group project that we worked on, I was in charge of running the financials. So I had to get all this data and and I do all this stuff. So just have backups, right, to the things that you're talking about. Then we'll say, okay, so tell me about some of the weaknesses that you have. And I remember at Goldman, we would ask 4 variations of this question. So I would tell our interviewers to say, hey, ask a weakness question, and then ask them a failure question, and then ask them an area of improvement question, and then ask them a feedback question. And the point is, we know everyone is really hardworking and does a great job, but we want people because if I have 30 interviews today for investment banking, guess what? Everyone's strength is going to be attention to detail, great team player, and good leader, right? Those are probably the things I'd hear 27 out of the 30 interviews that day. So what I really want to get to is, all right, what about Carly or what about Rebecca that this person is working on, right? How will they fit in our team? So the weakness question becomes really important. Again, if folks have specific questions on how we should answer them, I'll answer those as well. But that's where the next thing goes. And then we then really get into your teamwork and sort of because in banking and private equity, you're working on very lean deal teams, right? So it's really important for us that this individual will be a really good team player, right? So if we have a complex transactions that needs to be done in the next 1 week, we want to make sure that this individual can take on the responsibility and actually work on the team, but also work on something on their, as a leader on their own. So I think really, really important. We talk about, tell me about a time, right, when you failed. Tell me about a time when you had a difficult team situation. Tell me about a time when there was a, team member that wasn't great, and how'd you overcome that, right? So all of these things I really want to understand. Then there's the other part of behavioral questions that we're calling situational. These are becoming much more important. So these questions are ones like, hey, okay, Carly, we're in the office at 6 p.m. You're the only one on the team that's in the office. Okay, so the client calls you and asks you to make a bunch of changes in the model. Your associate or your VP isn't around. How would you deal with that situation? So these are directly putting you in the line of fire and being like, okay, there's 2 MDs that are asking you, or come to Carly or come to Rebecca or come to Elizabeth and said, hey, there's a deadline coming up on Friday. I need you to work on this. And 2 separate MDs or partners have come and told you this. How would you handle that situation? So we really want to get behind your mind here a little bit and understand how would you react in these sorts of pressure situations? Those are the other types of situational. So I would sort of prepare for both your own story, but also these type of prepare situation. Again, my advice on both of these are the same. For practice 5 or 6 really, really good stories about yourself. Hey, that one time when I was leading this team for this class, like our team member, like one of our 5 team members, like completely disappeared. So I had to go and figure out how to reallocate work or blah, blah, blah. And that was when I was the leader. Or, I had to do a fundraiser for our, Duke golf team. One of your prior presidents, Hannah, who's now at GS, was on the golf team at Duke. So I think that was a Duke Bow golf connection, I guess. But, I was on the Duke golf team, and we had to organize this fundraiser, and like this is that happened, and this is how I came together and did it. So we want to hear sort of the 5 or 6 really good stories that you have that have multiple layers of that, but also show and answer some of these questions in different ways. Again, if folks have questions, I can double click on this, but that's how I think about the behavioral side. And then there's the other side of the interviews, which is more finance and technical. Again, in this, there's 2 types. One is sort of the broader why finance. So, Rebecca, the question you answered about, are you really interested in banking, right? Are you just here because everyone else is doing finance? If you say, hey, actually, you know what, I am interested in finance for X, Y, and Z because it is the best environment for learning, challenging work, it helps companies solve their problems, you build this financial skill set, and I'm passionate about understanding businesses, they'll be like, okay, cool, this person's done their diligence and done their homework about why they want to be in finance. And then the other element to that is markets related. 75+% of our hire reviews have a market related question in them. Things like, what do you think of the recent interest rate environment, inflation environment, foreign policy? What issues are you tracking in the broader economic sort of markets, financial markets? So the way to prepare for those isn't to cram, but it's to today go on DealBook and start reading 10 minutes a day, just any articles around financial news, and then you'll just start sort of speaking the language a little bit better, because we will ask you, what deals are you following? Especially, right, Rebecca, you said healthcare. I'll be like, okay, cool. Maybe can you tell me an example of a healthcare deal that you think is interesting? So you'll be like, oh, you know what? Yes, Pfizer bought this company last month, and this is why they did the deal, right? So I want you to be super uber prepared for these interviews so that there's no sort of chinks in that armor, right, that people can sort of dig into. And the second type of technical questions is just pure technical questions where we'll say, okay, can you walk me through how an income statement works? Or can you walk me through how, like an accrued expense works through the income statements? Again, these are just textbook answers. If you read like one of the resources, I'm sure that that you guys have access via BOW or even some of the Elevate stuff, it'll help you prepare for those. But those are just checkbox stuff. Those are just like reading and memorizing a packet and understanding how financial accounting and financial evaluation works. So, but that's also equally important in an interview. So to me, it's 4 things: behaviorals, situationals, why finance, and then technical. So I want you all to be successful in all 4 of those things and prepare for all 4 of this. Hire reviews, I think this is perspectives from like a lot of our investment banking analysts. So preparing strong examples, network. So it's important to say, hey, I've met, from Duke, right? I've met Julia from Lazard. I've met Hannah from Goldman, or I've met Angela from Barclays. Like whoever your Duke BOW alumni are, just kind of talking about them. Following current events, again, important. Like I said, keeping them concise. I think the area where our students really, really struggle is just kind of rambling without a purpose. So structure them and keeping them concise, and don't get flustered. So Rebecca had a great example that could have flustered people, right? So just sort of answer it with whatever you can, and sort of keep it conversational. I think the other thing. Okay, I'm not sure that we have time to get into the technical stuff. But yeah, let me pause again. I might go to the technical stuff in a second, but any other questions that people have as we talk about interviews and other things? Or even if you're like, hey, I'm not getting traction, or things like that, I'm happy to answer and try to give you all advice. Yeah, Carly.
I had a quick question. So I'm a sophomore, and so I have an internship lined up for my upcoming summer, but I'm now recruiting for banking and some private equity companies right now. And it's difficult when you have to talk about like your upcoming internship, but you haven't done it yet. So I'm doing sales and trading this summer. And so sometimes you'll ask me like, why are you not doing sales? Why are you not interested in doing sales and trading again for your junior summer and things like that? And it's hard to answer because I haven't actually done my internship yet this summer. And I'm sure a lot of other sophomores are facing the same issue.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think you face this a double issue of why is it like not directly related to banking, right? Because that's the second issue that you're facing. Oh, sales and trading so different from banking. So there's two questions in what you asked, both good questions. So the first question about how do you talk about something that you haven't done yet? I think the most professional way to talk about it and the most impactful way to talk about it is be like, hey, I've been very thoughtful about and Carly, this answer is going to really be different for you because you're doing something in a slightly different industry, but where I'm really impressed with candidates and where I'm telling you all to do here, you can just take this and rinse and repeat, but is, hey, I've been very thoughtful about where I want to pursue in my career. My number one goal, or what I'm recruiting for is investment banking. Again, for private equity, replace with private equity, but that's my goal for junior year and for full time. Therefore, I've sort of, for my sophomore year summer, I really did work, and I'll tell you the S&T answer in a second, but let's say you're going to work at a PE farm and now you're interviewing for an investment bank. You just say, look, I wanted to get a very solid exposure to financial markets, a solid sort of work team environment, and a solid firm where I can get a lot of great deal experience, and then use that to then help me within banking. Yes, I'm not doing banking this summer, but what I'm hoping to get out of private equity is deal work, exposure to clients, exposure to business opportunities, et cetera, such that I can use that to go to my real goal, which is investment banking. So yes, you haven't done that internship yet, but tell me about your thought process behind structuring the way that you did. Not just, hey, that was the only job I got. That might be the truth, but don't say that, right? So say like, I've been very thoughtful about how I've structured my process, that I want to get X and then I want to get Y, and that will help me become really good at Z, which is what my goal is, right? So when I can see you all tell me your logic behind something, even whether it was true or not, I think, whether it was actually the reason you're going into that or just was the best job that you get, becomes really important. Most of our people, I would say for everyone here, within Elevate, like I said, we're partnered with about 100 organizations, 120 across 30 schools. So we probably see 75 to 80% of students that go into banking or private equity, right? Just by the nature of all the firms everyone goes into. Of that number, less than 25% have actually straight up investment banking internship their summer before. So I wouldn't worry about, even if they have, they're sort of more boutique-y, like very small places. So for everyone on this call, other than Carly, don't worry about something that's not banking related, okay, that you're doing for the summer. But Carly, for you specifically, since it's S&T, I think you need a kind of a slightly nuanced approach here. I think you say, look, basically, and what has been your answer? Let me hear that first, and then I'll sort of give you my sort of take on this.
So I basically have been saying that I had taken a financial markets class at Duke prior to applying for internships, and it was something that really interests me. So I applied for sales and trading jobs, and I'm really interested in learning more about the markets, working on a team, and learning to work closer with clients, also working in a bank environment, but I'm more looking to transfer over to investment banking and work closer with corporate clients and things like that. That's what I would
good answer
say.
Good start to that answer. I think the way I would make that even better would be like, hey, I've done more diligence over the last 6 months in this process. I've spoken to a ton of people in investment banking, and look, as a sophomore, my own views have evolved, right? So I think the sales and trading, because by saying that, like, one thing you said here that was a little bit of a yellow flag for me was something like, I'm also interested in banking, or I'm equally interested, something like that you said. I don't think you want to have any doubt that you want to 100% do bank, especially for bank interviews at full time. Say, hey, I've committed to this because my first intro into finance was financial markets. And that's what I want to do. And that's what I wanted to do. And that's the internship I got. I'm super excited about it because it's going to give me X, Y, and Z. I've built out my own skill set, my own networks, my own sort of understanding of this space. I've gone more, knowledge and awareness about investment banking and M&A. And I think it's an amazing way of my own interest of helping corporate clients and working on strategy, et cetera. But also the experience that I'll get in the financial markets will help me understand a lot of the overlay, right? Financial markets, economics, micro, macro stuff, interest rates, inflation, asset prices, all that stuff that then will ideally help me, as I go into investment banking future. So the couple of things I would edit your answer is, one, have really strong conviction that you now know for sure you're going into that you're not going to waffle. Because like, let's say you go to S&T and you love it, and then they give you a return offer, then are you going to rescind our offer and go back? But we don't want to have any of those sort of doubts in our minds. So you just say, hey, I'm excited about this. Also, I'm excited about this other thing, but that's going to help me kind of become better at this X, Y, and Z. So similar structure, but slightly more nuanced, because you're going into an industry that's like directly like polar opposite to banking, even though it's in the same bank. Like that's why people have questions like, do you want to do sales and trading or do you want to do banking? You just kind of squash it and say, no, I'm really interested in banking. Honestly, like, I'm whatever you're doing at BOW, I'm actually also leading like the corporate outreach, or whatever your all's roles are. You just kind of make it like, hey, that's gotten me more exposure into banking and banking professionals, and now that's sort of reinvigorated my interest in that. So that would maybe be a way that I would work on that answer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, we have a couple minutes left here. I will leave you all with, if there are any burning questions, I will take them. I will just leave you all. Are there anything else that people want to ask? Okay, well, if not, I think I would point
I
you
just
to
have one quick question.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So I know you mentioned earlier that like with like venture capital, it's not really like straight from undergrad. You usually do like investment or banking before going into venture capital. So what would it look like if you were to just go like undergrad straight to that? And like what would that pathway be?
Okay, cool. This is like, I got this last night. We were at Princeton and I got the same exact question. So it must be like a lot of people are interested in VC, and I get this a lot when we speak. Look, Elizabeth, I will not be able to do this question full justice on our call like right now. So feel free to LinkedIn message or email our team, and I'll try to get to the team will forward me your question and I'll answer whatever. You can send me a message on LinkedIn. But my general view on venture capital is such. Venture capital is one of the most exciting areas that equity, I would lump into that. Growth equity, I mean, if you're at all interested in venture capital or growth equity, you should absolutely try to attend the Saturday session we have on probably one of the best growth equity shops in the world, TCV. And it helps you all. I mean, they're the ones who invested in over 300 companies like, Spotify, Netflix, Peloton, Facebook, LinkedIn, Expedia, like literally every single company since like the 2000s. So I think definitely recommend if you're interested in VC. Here's my view on VC though. It's a lot smaller of an industry than banking or growth equity or private equity. And why I always tell our students to be a little bit wary of going into it right after undergrad is the way you succeed in VC, right? Think about it. The companies that you're investing in are very early stage, right? So they're like, hey, would you invest in Uber when it was literally an app on a phone or like, on your computer? Maybe, maybe not. So from a junior person's perspective, the reason why, banking or consulting or PE is really valued in the industry is because you're building a lot of hard skills, right? Early on in your career. If you're analyzing, Uber when it had 5 clients, analysis you're doing, you're just asking a bunch of people saying, is the app nice to use? Is this good? Do you like the management team, etc. So by virtue of it, VC is a really, really hard job, but at the junior level is not going to be analytical. It's going to be very much like industry analysis, or it's going to be like, hey, go, source a bunch of opportunities. And look, it's fine, but just make sure that you know what you're getting yourself into kind of going into VC, because not all VC opportunities are going to be created the same. My recommendation for anyone who's interested in VC is, again, each person, their advice is going to be different. So I don't love giving blanket advice to everyone. Like everyone interested in VC should do this. But my suggestion could be that you sort of try to go to one of these accelerator programs, like Bessemer has one. A lot of these VC firms have these accelerator programs. Try to get into those for like either during the school year or part of the summer, but also try to dual track like a more established analytical technical role like a banking PE or management consulting, such that you can compare and contrast the two on your own, right? So that's my advice on VC. Again, we have tons of, we've had on SoftBank, like just go down the list, a ton of firms. You can go listen to them on why they do VC, but or how they do VC. But I see the biggest pipeline to VC come out of my MBA schools, and then out of 2 years in banking consulting, and then into VC. But again, to each his own, right? It's sort of like each or her own. And so, it's sort of, it just depends. Yeah, that's what I would say about VC. But if there's more nuanced questions, you can obviously like reach out to me. So I think in the interest of time and, respecting everyone's time here, I will just end here. Hopefully this is helpful. One thing my team has asked all of our students to do, all of our universities, and I ask you guys for it. If you want, but I think we appreciate it. If you can write a testimonial, it takes 5 seconds. Just say what school you took it at, right? So I was at Duke or whatever, took the session, and whatever you want to write about it. Again, if you found something, if you found it useful, you can do it. But more importantly, I'd say, look, from a first-generation immigrant, like no family in finance background, and I've got very lucky in my career, but also put myself in positions to be lucky. So the message I want to leave with everyone here is, it doesn't matter if you don't have family in an industry. It doesn't matter if sort of, you have one or the other. Definitely take advantage of all of these resources that, we've been really fortunate in the last 2 years to now become, the largest sort of platform here and network. So definitely take advantage, but also don't stop short of achieving your goals, right? I think that's the biggest thing. Don't let anything sort of get in the way, because there's always going to be reasons why you're not a good fit, right? Rebecca, why you are not going to be a good fit for something, or you're not perceived not to be good, or whatever people want to throw at you. But I think, you are, your confidence and sort of ability to pursue. I meant the question that they tried to ask you was what I was going after. But my point is, like, you don't let it stop you to kind of achieving those goals. And that's kind of what I've learned over my career, which I want to pass on to the next generation here. So definitely take advantage, and definitely take advantage of all the recruiting sessions and stuff that we have in the Connect platform, etc. So Carly, let me turn it back over to you. And as always, really, really fun to sort of speak at Duke again, I guess for the third year now with the Business Oriented Women Group. So great job for the team for putting all this together.
Great. Thank you so much. We appreciate you
Yeah.
coming and chatting with us.
Yeah, of course. Best of luck in the process, especially for our sophomores. The next 2 months are going to be a little bit of a whirlwind, but you'll get through it and be successful. But yeah, if you have questions offline and want to ask anything more specific, feel free to reach out and I'll try to get to those when I can. All right, everyone, have a wonderful night. Okay.
Thank
See
you
you.
so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Yeah, you're
you.
welcome. Yeah. Bye-bye, team.